Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Professor Devarshi Prasad Nath and I teach Cultural Studies at Tejpur University. Today we are going to look at the module Cultural Geography of Films. This module has been written by Sikrita Duara, a research scholar in the Department of Cultural Studies at Tejpur University. In this module, we will be looking at the intersection between the areas of cultural geography and films. Introduction. Cultural geography, as the name suggests, initially emerged as a subfield of human geography. It is formed from the words culture, which refers to the day-to-day experiences of people, and geography refers to the study of places and spaces. Therefore, cultural geography is the study of the cultural norms, products and practices and their commonality and variations across time and place. While it is very difficult to arrive at one whole and inclusive definition of the term due to its diverse and all-encompassing nature, let us begin by saying that cultural geography as a field strives to investigate both representational as well as non-representational characteristics of culture. This includes art, artifacts, landscapes, as well as the customs, practices and issues of gender, sexuality, ethnicity, race across geographies. Now, what could be the appropriate cultural activities for geographers to investigate? For this, let us look at the definition of culture once again. Anderson says, I quote, "Culture can be defined as an amalgamation of all human activities which influences and is influenced by aspects of society, politics and economy. It thus encompasses a wide spectrum of human life, including the material things, the social ideas, the performative practices, and emotional responses that we participate in, produce, resist, celebrate, deny, or ignore." Unquote. This cultural life does not exist in vacuum. All cultural activities take place in particular context, and the product of the intersection between context and culture is the place of occurrence. Something takes place in a place and attributes meaning and identity to that place. From a cultural geographic perspective, as a result of the complex intersections of culture and context, places carry their own baggage of meaning and identity. And this is what cultural geography seeks to explore, the place where the confluence of culture and context takes place. What are of importance to cultural geographers are the remnants of cultural life left behind in the place. These are called traces. It is these traces which lend meaning to the place. They are not constant but change over time, and in doing so, continually influence the meanings and identities of places. Hence, traces bind culture and geographies together, influencing them both. These traces, according to cultural geographers, are not neutral, but rather stand for particular cultural performances or ideas about what the world should be like. By doing this, traces try to persuade us to agree with and support these cultural values too. The task of the cultural geographer, then, is to study the cultural life of the people and the meaning they impart to the place on the basis of the traces they leave behind at various points in time. It is worthwhile to remember that what a place represents is not fixed, since places are always in dynamic state of transition. Cultural geographers also interrogate the agents, activities, ideas, and context that come together to leave certain traces in places. Cultural geography, history, and emerging trends. Cultural geography can be broadly understood as a practice that far predates the modern academic subfield of geography. Some of the early scholars who wrote on cultural geography include the ancient Greek thinker Herodotus, whose account of the Persian Empire is still talked about today, the Roman Strabo's 17-volume Geographia, in which he details about people and places of the Mediterranean world that he visited, and the writings of the Moroccan-born Ibn Battuta, where he recounts his travels through the Muslim Empire at that time, which stretched from North America through India to Southeast Asia and China. Cultural geography from the 19th century onwards was highly descriptive and dealt with travel accounts of people and places, descriptions of the relationship between the conditions of physical world and humans. During this period, geographic explorations of different cultures were highly influenced by positivism, behavioral psychology, and also abstract quantitative methods. In reaction against this preoccupation with positivism, Carl O. Sauer and his students from the University of California started to reassert the empiricist documentation of cultural difference and distribution, employing theoretical insights from cultural anthropology and landscape history to study the human-environment relationship, material culture and landscape. Today, cultural geography is not immune to issues of discourse, power, justice, the body, difference, hybridity, transnationalism, actor networks, resistance, transgression, performance, and representation. Cultural geographic studies now go beyond mere descriptions of visible features of landscape. How and why certain geographies are represented the way they are also form an important area of study. In many instances, this has opened the door to issues of race, gender, and sexuality as legitimate topics of study in cultural geography. Why read films for cultural geography? Since the later part of the 20th century till now, cultural geographers have turned their attention to analysis of everyday objects, views of nature in art and film, to study the meaning of landscapes and place-based identities. Films are one of the key places where the world acquires life. It can provide visual details of the landscape and the cultural life of people. It is this ability of films to circulate representations of various cultural groups and their practices that makes it an important tool for cultural geographers. A film could provide moving images of people, places, landscapes, art, performances, and artifacts from across different geographies. Cinema and geographies. The essence of cinematic representations is that they are an interpretation and not just a record of the space and place under study, and these interpretations may shape the ways in which people interact and act upon the places and spaces. At the same time, from a cultural geographer's point of view, it is also essential to understand that a film can create a strong sense of national identity and naturalize nationalist ideologies. It can provide a platform where questions of nation, nationality, and culture can be interpreted, assessed, and meanings negotiated. In the Indian context, there are several examples where a strong image of the nation and the lives of the people in various trying times in history have been depicted by cinema. Queries about identity, representations of nations and nation-states is another area that has been baffling cultural geographers for some time now. Apart from commercial films, documentary films have also been used within anthropological research to serve as a vehicle for mediating remote places and its inhabitants. However, the present module will only concentrate on popular films to understand the underlying cultural and geographic landscape of a region. Film as tool for cultural geographers. Films have a great capacity to nourish the collective geographic imaginarium of people. While earlier it was the maps which told people about geographic locations, this was later succeeded by literary text, paintings, etchings, etc., which came as advancement over the cartographic methods as it provided visuals of various places. By the end of the 19th century, however, this visual knowledge of remote places found a new medium of cinema, which, with its unique ability to provide moving images that transcends time and space, became an important area for investigation by the cultural geographers. Films then began to create a new kind of geographic culture, a democratization of the visual image in such a way that the unknown places and landscapes of remote areas which were earlier inaccessible to a majority of people became available. Cinema presented moving images, an advance in the capacity to transmit a determined geographic space to the audience. The cinematic and geographic relationship can be established in two ways. Firstly, where the film production mediates the geographic space and thus an influential factor upon the final product, and secondly, it is an innate power to influence our perception of the geographic space and culture. It has the power not just to create cultural images of varied geographic locations, but also has the ability to disseminate them. Thus, films are mimetic in nature, and it is this mimetic tendency of films that draws the attention of cultural geographers. Films are also a medium which allows the investigation of the production of dominant ideologies at a site of resistance, in which the stability of any meaning is opened up for scrutiny. Now let us look at one of the core areas of cultural geography in films, to which cultural geographers have devoted much of their time and effort: cinema and landscapes. According to Mitchell, I quote, "Landscape is a natural scene mediated by culture. It is both a represented and presented space, both a signifier and a signified, both a frame and what a frame contains, both a real place and its simulacrum, both a package and a commodity inside a package," unquote. In a film, we come across two types of landscapes: the cultural landscape and the natural one. Natural landscapes refer to the topographical features of a particular place, like the hills and valleys and rivers. In general, the manifestations of nature. The term cultural landscape, on the other hand, refers to the way human beings have reshaped the natural landscapes into human settlements, investing it with the force of culture. Carl O. Sauer argued that landscape is not just a passive stage upon which culture can enact its drama of life, but the morphology of landscape is depicted accurately in the ways in which it actively connects with culture. Vimal Dissanayake studied such a use of language and landscape in Indian filmmaker Satyajit Ray's Pather Panchali, The Song of the Little Road. In Ray's Pather Panchali, one of the first films in the Apu trilogy, he thematizes the trials and tribulations of a Brahmin family living in a small village at the beginning of the 20th century. The father, Harihar, the head of the family, is a poor priest and a poet whose mere earnings hardly suffice for the family. Ray uses the landscape metaphorically. The use of the pond and the reflection in it signify their illusionary childhood desires, which are also almost impossible. Here the landscape is used to introduce a lyrical quality and also to present a metaphorical enunciation. Apu and Durga wander by themselves in the wild amidst the white kash flowers. They see a train in the distance, the top of its engine billowing clouds of smoke over the spread of white flowers. This sequence of events suggests a number of ways in which human meaning is invested in the landscape. The arrival of the train on the landscape can be understood as the inevitability of modernization and its effect on the village. It shows how the simplicity of the village will soon change with the arrival of the train, which stands against the landscape as a dominant symbol of modernity. The reference to the bioscope wala and the father going to the city in search of work are also indicators of this change that would soon come about in the lives of the people in the remote village of Bengal with the advent of modernization. The scene where the train breaks into the serenity of the landscape is also illustrative of the way in which Ray uses landscapes to frame his meaning. It is in this sequence that Apu realizes for the first time the emergence of his own individuality. This is how Ray uses nature and spatial consciousness to good effect. Towards the end of the film, The sound of the train in the distance can be heard again as Harihar lies awake at night staring at the ceiling. This is symbolic of the loss of the family and a call for a new beginning in the city. Satyajit Ray uses the landscape to generate meaning. This is evident in the sequence where Durga runs to the side of the pond in the midst of a torrential downpour and dances with newfound freedom and liberty. Apu, who runs after Durga, partakes in the sight of his sister dancing in the rain as the heavy shower infuses Durga with a rare sense of vigor and independence. Very quickly, ditches and ponds are overflowing with water. A dog dashes through the rain towards a house for shelter. Apu calls out to her, but his voice gets drowned in the rain. Durga turns and runs across the field to Apu, who is taking shelter under an old tree. She covers Apu with the end of her sari in a protective manner. Ray, in this sequence, deploys the landscape as a way of giving greater definition and understanding to the personality of Durga, her experience of freedom, her enjoyment of her body, and with subtle hints of eroticism. Satyajit Ray uses an everyday landscape to show the socio-cultural situation in Bengal at large in the beginning of the 20th century, while also driving home the point that in the inexorable flow of life, one should not miss out on the smaller pleasures of nature. Throughout the film, we see how the director has skillfully created landscapes and meanings out of landscapes out of the conjunction between their natural and cultural settings. Although it is not impossible to narrow down the definition of landscape on the basis of human intervention, absence or presence of natural features, or the impact of conspicuous characteristics, what one should bear in mind while understanding landscapes is that they are a complex mixture of heterogeneous elements, each contributing in their own way to create a sense of space, place, culture, and nation. For geographer David Harvey, films can throw light on the ongoing debates of the postmodern culture in that it can explain the multifaceted relationship between temporality and spatiality in the modern age, particularly in the postmodern times. Harvey believed that one of the prominent features of this postmodern condition is the simultaneous compression of time and space and the deterritorialization of culture, which means that identity is no longer rooted to one specific place but is continuously renegotiated among the shifting semantic contents of images and signs. Pagham provides a description of the use of landscape in the Oscar-winning film by Anthony Minghella, The English Patient. This film shows how cinema can construct ideas about race and culture. In the film, an analogy is drawn between the cave paintings, which stand testimony to the demise of the once flourishing civilization, and the wasted Tuscan landscape, which was once the epicenter of European culture. In doing this, the film shows a rare kind of humanity, one that transcends the borders of class and nationality. The film is set against the backdrop of contested political borders, with repeated aerial shots of the desert juxtaposed against the gashes underneath the English patient's bandaged body. The film also draws a visual analogy between the undulating dunes of the Sahara and the contours of a female body. It shows the desert obliterating the distinctions and hierarchies, and as such, it stands opposed to the impartial partition of Africa and the Indian subcontinent, as well as the aggressive contestation of borders that has ravaged Europe. Catherine Clifton, the English patient's mistress, played by Kristen Scott Thomas, at one point in the film confides her dream of a life without borders. Landscape as space. Landscape as space refers to the space of action, the area in which the drama unfolds. Unlike landscape as place, The landscape as space in cinema is a concept which is minimized by the cinematic shot and focusing the attention of the viewer on the social space and dialogue between actors. Example, landscape as space include close-ups of characters with blurry backgrounds, shots that remove the landscape from view, revealing only an object and the sky, or action shots that move rapidly through a landscape. Landscape as place. Place provides a sense of realism by grounding the film narrative to a locational history. Landscape as place refers to the geographic location where the narrative is set, as place landscape is often established with a master shot which gives a good idea about the entire local that's going to house the story. According to Bernard Nichtman, there are 4 ways in which a film can depict a strong sense of place. Firstly, the story is narrated in such a way that it allows the viewer to understand the various geographic scales that are negotiated throughout the production. This enables the viewer never to be lost in narrative space. Secondly, films use multiple signifiers of place, allowing the everyday complexities of place to be available to the viewer. Thirdly, rather than positioning the place as a background scenario, films can position it in the foreground as a supporting actor. Fourthly, narratives can be situated within place rather than simply focusing on events and actions. Some directors like Walter Silas, Robert Redford, Clint Eastwood, Steven Soderbergh, Woody Allen made good use of this in their films. Landscape as place is usually depicted on extreme long shots, and deep focus shots using a bird's eye view or high angle camera setup. For example, in Burfi, the master shot is also the opening shot. The melodious music wafts in the air as the movie begins with a master shot of the entire Darjeeling town, thus establishing the location where the story will unfold. The subsequent shot shows the hospital with a musician playing music on the sidewalk. In the picture, the landscape provides a strong idea about the place. The use of the wall with its inscriptions and symbols suggests Darjeeling's political ideology and also gives an idea about the social norms and practices in the communist town. Through repetition, these images reinforce and create a bond between narrative and place. Landscape as spectacle. Spectacle is something which is visually pleasing. Landscape as spectacle can satisfy the scopophilic and topophilic drives of the viewer, and for a short time the voyeuristic appeal created by the narrative. Landscape as spectacle combines several functions in one image. A master shot, for example, can combine the function of landscape as place and as spectacle. In films, landscape is understood both as a spectacle of beauty or a spectacle in itself because of the fact that it creates curiosity and the interest of the audience. And as something beautiful, landscape as spectacle also encodes certain power relations within the gaze of the spectator as to what constitutes beauty, who is gazing, and what is being gazed upon. These questions reveal the power structures underlying certain cinematic landscapes. Here we have the opening shot of the movie Water, directed by Deepa Mehta. The film is based on the life of widows and shows how after widowhood, the woman's life is reduced to a state of deprivation and penury. The film Water is set in 1938, before the independence of India, and revolves around the lives of the widows who are kept in an ashram in the holy city of Benares. Although the film has been shot in Sri Lanka due to opposition from some Hindu fundamentalist elements in India, the film has been able to create a resemblance to the holy city of Benares in India with a careful use of landscape, and hence fits into the narrative perfectly. The film centers around the life of a young 8-year-old girl, a widow who is called Chuya, who is forced to live in the ashram amongst old widows. Chuya meets Kalyani, a beautiful widow who lives a life of self-deprivation and is forced into prostitution by the head of the ashram, Madhumati. In the picture, which is the establishing shot of the film, the director seeks to show how the innocence and purity of the characters of Kalyani and Chuiya remain untouched and blooms like a lotus despite the murkiness of their surroundings. This shot of the lotus in the stagnant murky water can be seen in contrast with the water of the Ganges, which ripples with a force of life. It is not stagnant, just as life is not static but moves on. The films use landscape as a metaphor at many levels. As Kalyani falls in love with Narayan, played by John Abraham, who is an ardent believer in the civil disobedience campaign of Mahatma Gandhi, their romance is played out against the backdrop of the sacred water of the Ganges, where people bath, do rituals, and send the ashes of the dead. Again, towards the end of the movie, Shakuntala, played by Seema Biswas, a devout Hindu who cares for Chuiya, hands her over to Narayan as he lives in a train with Gandhi. Here, landscape of the living train is used metaphorically, where the train represents Gandhiji's train of freedom and liberation of widows and women. Politics of representation. Cinematic landscape is itself a representational form, and as such, it cannot be without cultural and political bias. Films are often considered to provide a window to the real world. Therefore, landscape cannot be studied objectively. A lot of meanings are embedded in the cinematic landscape, which reflect important themes and realities of the world. The significance of film geography is that we can no longer talk about films representing or mimicking a single coherent reality. This is because everything is filmed from some perspective, and the signature of the author and his or her ideologies have a mark on the final outcome. An important area of research for film geographers, therefore, is to look at how particular meanings are ascribed to people and place as they appear on the screen. This requires an appraisal of how cinematic techniques are used to convey action in the narrative. Underpinning all these research areas, there is an interest in the power relations behind the construction of meaning and the practices of viewing, so that people can understand and the places as well as the notions of how, where and when to watch. There is a substantial difference in the projection of the city when it is made by a non-Indian or a non-residential Indian, such as Meera Nair, who made Salaam, Bombay. The film Slumdog Millionaire, for example, sends a strong message to the international audience about the real status of India's economic capital, Mumbai. In Danny Boyle's Oscar-winning film, the Indian cultural and geographic landscape at large is reflected by the landscape of Mumbai's slum area, Dharavi, deconstructing all myths about the glitter and glamour of India's city of dreams. This depiction of the city may be a feast for the eyes for a non-Indian and might turn out to be a signifier of the real India underneath the facade of its developing and progressive status worldwide. In this film, Mumbai is looked at from the white man's ethnocentric gaze. The landscapes are inherently Indian, but they do not necessarily reflect the whole of India. However, the landscape of the slum is a spectacle for the Europeans, and it is something which reflects India's poverty and inefficient governance. Gillian Rose, while applying Laura Mulvey's concept of patriarchal gaze in Hollywood movies, challenged the hegemony of white male gaze in landscape studies. According to Rose, a landscape is not a monolithic construction, but it takes different meanings within the different scopic regimes which exist for different cultural and social groups across the world. Such representations provide a clear picture about how geographical representations can shape one's ideas about a place. From the above example, we can see how films can create strong images in the minds of the people about places by its selective representation of details. There are also many instances when certain cities like Mumbai, Delhi, New York, London, Manhattan, Paris get prominence in films over other cities which remain unknown or unexplored. By highlighting certain landmarks in these places like the Gateway of India, the India Gate, the Eiffel Tower, the Statue of Liberty, the Howrah Bridge, etc., films give them an advantage over others by making them a part of the collective urban imaginarium. By showing certain landmarks, films have the power of reflecting the dynamism of distant places earlier unknown in certain cultures. Yet, in spite of the intensity with which certain places are portrayed, including those recently added to this collective imaginarium, it has to be remembered that those films which make the greatest impact transmit an incomplete image of the earth. There may be certain territories which draw the attention of the camera and stand out, while there may be many other places which are conveniently covered, not covered, and forgotten. There are landscapes, cities and territories that are not selected and whose images have not been seen by the audience, even in those cases that are physically close to them. This makes it all the more important for a cultural geographer to assess the image of landscape both culturally and physically that cinema doles out to the audience. They need to analyze which landscapes have been privileged by cinema and what kind of image is being sent across, since this can have serious economic and territorial implications. Another cause of a cultural geographer's interest in cinema is the fact that cinema can give testimony to human activity by reflecting those areas which has flourishing economic activity and ignoring those territories which are in crisis and which show less dynamic human activity. Mumbai, for example, has found place in many Hindi films such as Diwar, Nayakan, Salam Bombay, Parinda, Hathiyar, Agnipath, Life in a Metro, Traffic Signal, etc. In relation to Mumbai, other cities of the country have found little space in mainstream Bollywood cinema. Conclusion. Cultural geography, as a subfield of human geography, has long been involved in mapping the cultural lives of people in varied geographic locations by studying the customs, practices, relics, artifacts, and landmarks. In short, the cultural traces left by people. While earlier the field applied a more anthropological approach in its inquiry, with the coming of the 1980s, the impetus was on a new form of representative and interpretive cultural geography which accepted the role of human beings as active producers of cultural products, processes and meanings. Emerging from its antiquarian phase, cultural geography began experimenting with a range of new ideas and approaches drawn extensively from contemporary cultural studies and on other theoretical developments across the social sciences. Although films had immense capacity to mediate our experience of a place, it received serious attention from cultural geographers only recently. Films have now found an important place in the domain of cultural geography. It is not just required as a mimetic representation of the real world, but also as a medium that allows investigations of the production of dominant ideologies and could be a site for resistance as well. Films represent a series of images and sounds that relay intersubjective meanings. Cultural geographers also look into the issues of film production, distribution and consumption, and the hegemony of certain film industries like the Hollywood at a global level. The study of films is not just restricted to the study of landscape or urban cityscapes. The domain of cultural studies now includes a wide range of topics like issues of mobility, gender and sexuality, and geopolitics, as well as the emotions and effects of reception that these cultural, social and political formations engender. Questions like why is a city projected in a certain way continue to be very important for cultural geographers. So are questions like what resemblance does it have with real life? Questions can also be asked by cultural geographers about the kind of interpretations and readings that are encouraged in films. However, despite everything films continue to engage in, geographers, if not for anything else, then because of the sheer power of the medium, can no longer afford to deny this academic space. In conclusion, it can be said that the cinematic geography is not simply a dissociated reading of entertaining text, but a cultural document, thus allowing insights into the historical construction of regions and their inhabitants, as well as the visual heritage of a proper represented nation. By analyzing the historical geography of an entire genre and the variations that take place during its existence, cinematic geography can be seen as a tool used to gain understanding of these historical dimensions. With this, we come to the end of the present module on cultural geography and films. Thanks a lot.